Hello, the two of you. All right, so let me get your names down real quickly. How are you doing? Are there any questions? Any questions or comments? All right. So good afternoon. Hi, Athena. Grateful to have you. I want to share the screen. Here, give me just a moment here. I don't know why it's not showing the handout. Let's see here. Try it again. Share at a time. Yeah, I have a PowerPoint as well as your argumentative handout that I had opened, and I don't know why it's not allowing me to do that. Let me try advanced. Portion of screen. If I did PowerPoint as virtual background. Sorry, as I'm experimenting while we're on video. It's PC. I have one on desktop. There's my drive. All right, so let's see here. We have now I'm trying to learn how to move the slides. I'm so sorry. All right, so number one, right, on your handout, you have an introduction to the topic. And in that introduction, you have an incredible development of manufacturing from 1859 to 1919, what we would entitle as the second industrial revolution, the main primary industrial revolution with which we're familiar, much of which we're familiar today. And so, the mechanization of production, things being produced by machines, steel and the employment of oil refining, and just the beginning of a myriad of industries. And yeah, so with the introduction of that it goes into number one on the fertile soil thesis. And that basically, if you were to choose number one, is the author, the writer is trying to pat the back of the United States. We're trying to praise ourselves for that which was manifested in the second industrial revolution, that it didn't happen by chance or by accident, that we created a, metaphorically, soil that was fertile for the development of business growth and commerce and consumerism, etc. All right. And so for one, we have a wealth of resources, in particular, soft and hard coal, bituminous and anthracite coal, just all kinds of lesser metals that are going to come into play with the metallurgical processes that were going on during the second industrial revolution, plenty of land, plenty of, and not to mention, we're going to tap the resources of steam and electricity. Steam, primarily by the 1870s, is going to power most machinery. And by the 1890s, electricity will. And so, so some major jumps, right? Another one is just international and national capital, money to play with, right? With the modern corporation, whereby the average shareholder doesn't have to claim responsibility for the fate of the corporation, but just ventures or risks his or her investment only. That type of phenomenon was not very old to modern history. And the modern corporation really took off in the number of subscribers and purchasers of shares in the public, NASDAQ or Wall Street market at this time. So capital, right? Money to begin a business, money to expand, really just took off at this time. Take a look in that section and with that respect. And then protection of private property. The courts in particular really manifested an inclination to defend business owners and property owners and protection of private property. As you see down in the second to last number on your argumentative assignment, they even went so far as to declare that the corporation is to be treated as an individual regarding a corporation's rights, tied it to the 14th Amendment, a bit ironically. And so you have a myriad of cases in which private property was sanctioned, was protected by the federal government. And so look at some examples in the handout of that. Then you have subsidized diversity and infrastructure with the telegraph, the railroad, at this time in particular, canal development, and other types of infrastructure. And then not to mention, by the 1890s, you already had the beginnings with Westinghouse of the collective use, like at Niagara Falls, of alternating current as a source of power and light there in the 1890s. And then a merit system for inventions, it made it worthwhile. It incentivized the process of trying to invent something. Not just that, what I should have on here also, and you find in number 1, is the fact that you have, I really need to get the handout out. The handout is more informative than this. We can look at actual sentences and support and so forth. But at any rate, for now, another thing that was not put in here on this PowerPoint that should have been is the marriage of academia and business. So make sure you get that down in your notes, okay? The union of academia and business. They're going to employ, right, leading professors from universities all throughout the world, in particular Europe, as hired guns, if you will, by the corporations to try to come up with as much, like for instance, to streamline production, to try to make production as efficient and cheap and quick as possible, right? And then because when you cut all the fat off of the production process, you could then save much money, much time. You can engage in economies of scale and put a lower price on your product and undersell your competitors. You could pay a more comparable competitive salary to your workers, et cetera, et cetera. And the case in point of this is Rockefeller. All right, let's see here. So you see some examples here. I'm not going to get into all of this, but just with my notes, there was like an organic process by which inventors piggybacked off of one another. For one, right, like I said, they now have access to time and all the resources they needed. You look at Thomas Edison, you look at Nikola Tesla and others, right? And you can contrast them with Charles Goodyear. Charles Goodyear had to go to jail, into debtor's jail, more than once, because he was trying to engage in the process of inventing what would later become vulcanized rubber, but he needed to make a living. He had to eat and feed his family. And so he ran into that dilemma. Not anymore. Now they could hire these engineers, these scientists, these academics, and to work in laboratories around the clock, pay them, And so that's all they had to do. That's all they had to worry about. And then not to mention, in trying to gain fame, to gain patronage for someone to pay for them to tinker for their corporation, right? What they would often do is they would advertise in the press. The press played a big role in the accumulation of inventions, because they would simply try to show off where they were. And oftentimes they were not complete. They were not completed in their process of invention. And so someone would read in the press where they were and say, oh, aha, that's a great novelty. I'm going to take that and run with it and add this or that. And then they would beat that other person to the invention office. So there were quite a few private injustices whereby people, had people steal their ideas and beat them to the patent office to get a patent on the invention. But the country itself arguably benefited from all this, right? Because just the number of inventions, the number of patents was just incredible. You look at Thomas Edison and Menlo Park alone in New Jersey had 1,093 patents just there alone. So the employment of steam, the famous Corliss steam engine was just incredible, and how many machines it could power at one given time. You see here the powerful spinning looms and the sewing machines, lumber saws and stone saws. It was an incredible time of novelty. Then you also have, like I said, Menlo Park. So universities in Prague, Paris, and I mentioned some names: the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph, multiplex telegraph, the pre-remote control industry, if you will, the megaphone, etc. Of course, Bell's telephone. So this was an incredible time of novelty. What Mark Twain would term the Gilded Age, right? And we're going to get into why it was called the Gilded Age next week. So let's see here. The employment of interchangeable parts that brought about the beginning of assembly line production, and you just can't compete with assembly line production if you do not employ that method. And so this is going to be the beginning of the de-skilling labor, whereby the machine is going to progressively do more of the productive work than the human being does, which was bittersweet. And then people would, Edward Bellamy, Henry George, and quite a few other intellectuals and critics of this time period contended that the machine began to take on a life of its own. We're going to get back to that soon. So at any rate, you have here looms, spindles, drive gears, line shafts, lathes, planers is just incredible. And then you have also the workings of iron and steel. And so wrought iron, pig iron, and it was a process of trying to decrease the amount of carbon present in the metal, because that a large amount of carbon made it more brittle. So hence extracting more of that carbon made it stronger. And then through oxidation, the Bessemer process, by blowing oxygen into the iron and getting it at a certain temperature, it took out the impurities of the iron and made it into more durable steel. The open hearth process, the Bessemer oven machines. Now this facilitated quick, effective mass production of steel, all right, which is going to be employed in a myriad of ways in the economy. However, right, from this, you're going to have social and other phenomenon, economic phenomenon that are going to become, results or some people would say there were casualties of progress. So for instance, right, skilled work began to further decline, so that they didn't need someone with an artisan's skills. They needed someone to just do very simple tasks related to the machines. And so now the worker becomes more expendable. right? If you don't like the salary you're getting, if you don't like your job, then too bad. We'll go ahead and find someone else who's equally, if not more desperate than you are. So you look here, right? New immigrants, we're going to get into that term next week. But look at this, 87% of Chicago constituted new immigrants and their children. 80% in New York, 84% in Milwaukee, and Detroit by 1890. And so as the new immigrants come in, they're going to take up the majority of de-skilled proletariat jobs for this industrialized economy. And so some people contended that we're going to get it further into this also with the progressive movement, that the work became dehumanizing. It began to make the workers feel alienated from their labor, from their own labor, and feel exploited and objectified. And so, yeah, we'll get back into that when we do Gilded Age Part 2 next week. Okay, let's see here. So the rise of some of these, now you could call them captains of industry in a positive light, or you could call them robber barons in a negative light, right? One of the numbers tries to defend Rockefeller. Rockefeller, from the time he was young, he was only like 16 years old, and he worked as a clerk in a produce company. Such were his skills, such was his work ethic, that he went from being paid $15 a month to $50 a month because he was saving the company so much money with his keen eye for economics. And it didn't take long, and he bought out his partners, he and a gentleman named Maurice Clark. And so he and Clark started their own produce company, and it didn't take long for him to accumulate $800 back then, which was a substantial amount that he accumulated on his own, because they said that he was very parsimonious, he was very frugal, and did not spend his money unnecessarily in his youth. And so at any rate, he saves money. He develops a good reputation with several people connected to his Baptist church to gain the trust of creditors. One such creditor was Henry Flagler, Flagler. And Flagler was a big source of money for him, of capital, when he badly needed it on more than one occasion. Well, he's going to buy out Clark, and he's going to leave the produce company behind, and he's going to take a chance on oil. So he was willing to take risks also, needless to say. And with oil, it certainly paid off. But at the time, initially, it was known as Drake's Folly, because some people believed that there wasn't going to be any, great utility for crude oil coming out from the earth. But of course, that would be refuted in time. And so he took loans from several people simultaneously. He was very well known for paying his loans back and being a man of his word. Again, he was very frugal. He was very sharp, very smart, had a good business acumen as far as when to leave a company and when to try a venture. And his new ventures almost always worked out for him. And so then he was never complacent when he began rising in oil. He became synonymous with vertical integration, taking over every process of production, from the extraction of crude oil from under the ground to getting it into barrels, getting it onto the railroads or the steamships, sent to the eastern markets, packaged, utilizing advertisement, and having it sold. He was incredibly adept. On the negative side, right, is when he saw vague areas where the law didn't precisely say that something was yet illegal, but he had reason to believe that it was immoral and that there was something seemingly unfair about it. He would not sign his name on some of those deals, but merely go by a handshake, not wanting a paper trail. So is that emblematic of a guilty conscience? And so his famous Lakeshore deal, he received nearly a 65% rebate from the railroads as they charged him per pound for oil. And of course, why would they do this? Because he guaranteed them a certain amount of tonnage per week. Well, he didn't have that much in tonnage. What he did is he joined up with other competitors, other big competitors, and they joined up their quantities together, received the rebate together, and then, of course, separated their stuff in the refining process in Cleveland, Ohio, and elsewhere where he was. And so at any rate, this is the beginnings of a type of cooperation that was seemed to be un-American, that was seemed to be anti-laissez-faire, against, rugged individualism of capitalism, because he was teaming up with other guys. So at any rate, the South Improvement Company, you could look that up. Basically, he would have some shell companies to avoid taxes. And so, he did some somewhat nefarious things as well. And then when he got big enough that he could squash his competition, he did so seemingly in ruthless fashion. So for instance, he would come in and he would have done his homework when he would meet with a small scale entrepreneur and say, basically, hey, I tell you what, I have the machinery to extract the oil more effectively than you do. I can carry the burden of your job better than you, but I see that you made this many 100,000 last year, but not to boast, but I made this many millions last year, right? And so I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll give you 8% share in my Standard Oil, and allow you to, take the burden of your job off of you and let me buy you out and merge with me. And through 8% share, and based upon what I made last year, you'll be making as much, if not more money doing nothing. So of course, some small scale entrepreneurs took his deal and ran with it. But when they didn't, right, when they had an emotional investment in their job, maybe it was a family business, etc., that's when he would get ugly and he would begin to threaten. Like JP Morgan and other robber barons, he bought the majority share in virtually every railroad and industry that he needed, that he knew his business was going to need, so he could sit on the governing board. Now, clearly that's a conflict of interest, right? But there were no laws that stopped that from happening. So he would tell them, right, well, I'll tell you what, if you don't want to sell to me, I sit on the governing board of the Erie Railroad, of the Central Railroad, whatever it might be, right, the Central New York. I will just make life hell for you. I'll keep the railroad from shipping your oil, and you're going to have to find an alternative means of transportation and storage for your crude and refined oil. So he had ways of really manipulating, threatening, and punishing smaller companies until he began to just buy out the majority of his competitors. At one time, states Howard Zinn, he controlled 90%, 90% of the oil refining business alone. So then you have, let's see here, Carnegie. The same thing, right, with Carnegie is you have on the one side what looks to be merit, what looks to set them aside from other people. There was a modern quote not too long ago where a modern robber baron, if you would, boasted that you could take money from all the wealthiest of Americans and equally allocate it to the other Americans. And he said, within 10 years, everybody will be back to where they are today. So Athena or Crystal, what do you think he meant by that? What do you think he meant by that? Any ideas? You could take money from the wealthy, distribute it evenly to other Americans, but within a decade, everybody's going to be back to where they are now. Any comments on that? All right. I don't want to put more pressure on you, but it was implied, right, that people get to where they are by reason of meritocracy, by reason of meriting or earning or deserving where they are. So hence, if you're poor, you deserve it. You earned it. You were lazy. You lacked ambition. You lacked drive. You lacked vision. And so hence, you pretty much deserve to be in the place where you are. You didn't utilize your time and your resources and your money very well. On the contrary, if you're rich, you must have done quite a few things right. You must have been very diligent or hardworking. You must have been very shrewd in your business decision skills. You must have been very ambitious and driven, et cetera, et cetera. And so you see an element of that, and that's one of the numbers in your argumentative assignment, is the conservative argument that these, quote, captains of industries, they earned their stripes, that they were anomalous. They were out of the ordinary as far as some of their behavior and some of their characteristics, etc. And that's what got them there. And there was a writer at this time, Horatio Algier, and he would write these dime store novels about this and say basically, right, and keep the hope alive amongst Americans that were working in factories and in mines and working their tails off for almost no, a very good income. He would tell them, just keep at it, work hard, look, keep your eyes open for the next opportunity, and through pluck and luck, you just might be the next one that hits the lotto, basically. All right. And then when you look at the life of Carnegie, you see a little element of that. By the time he was 14, from Scottish parents, immigrant parents, he was working as a bobbin boy. He worked so hard. He went above and beyond after work and doing other extracurricular activities as a young teenager to such a degree that it earned the attention and the favor of Thomas Scott. And Thomas Scott is going to have him work for his telegraph company and then join him in the Pennsylvania Railroad. And when he goes to the Pennsylvania Railroad, he has a very famous episode in which the railroad cars were stopped, basically. And he made the very controversial and brave decision to destroy those that were clogging the rest of them behind him up, and lose that little bit of money of those that were the cause of this holdup, so that the rest of them could come along the lines. And he had someone in an equivalent position, even superior position, that didn't have the guts to do that. He was afraid he'd get fired making that type of decision without Thomas Scott being present. Well, when Thomas Scott came back and heard about it, he was proud of Carnegie and wanted to reward and help him out for his shrewd decision. So you have elements of that, right? Where if things had been different, had Carnegie been different, he wouldn't perhaps have had the opportunities that he did. Thomas Scott is going to introduce him to Wall Street. He's going to get him into the Woodruff Palace Car Company stock, as well as American Express. And with both of those, he's going to be making, back then, as a young teenager, over $5,000 a year. And he took a great risk in buying that stock. He put his mother's house up for collateral for the loan for that stock. And so again, risk taking, etc., right? And so then in 1859, there was a gusher of oil on his acreage, and he began to tinker with oil. But what he became famous for was, by 1872, the Bessemer process of converting iron into steel. And he went back to Scotland on a family outing, and he came back with with Bessemer ovens, and he had the good luck of employing a man named Captain Bill Jones. And Captain Bill Jones was allegedly a genius when it came to the production of steel. And so he had him as his chief engineer, if you will. And then in addition to that, he met and formed a partnership with Henry Clay Frick. And Henry Clay Frick had access to bituminous or soft coal. And so they made a partnership because coal was being burnt in the smelting process to make steel. So it was a perfect marriage of coal and steel, of getting the resources and making the final product of steel. So at any rate, and then I'm not going to continue on for the rest of his life, but just note, right, there is an element to which, you know, some of these guys arguably earned their success. However, what he was infamous for doing is, for one, when profits went down, when the price for his steel plummeted, or the demand for his steel plummeted, he would lay workers off, and in some cases he would even provoke them into a strike. He would let Henry Clay Frick do the bad guy work, and began to cut their wages and heighten his demands of the workers, knowing full well that they were going to eventually strike. And then when they did, they were prepared for it. They would hire their goons, their Pinkertons, and one extreme case of the Homestead Act, they got the governor to bring a contingent of the National Guard to come and protect their business, their property, and their scab workers. And of course, they'd bring in scab workers to take their place. Another thing that he was infamous for was he would receive rebates like Rockefeller, and with that rebates, that greatly decreased his overhead, right? His cost of production and transportation and storage, etc. And in getting that corner, he would take advantage and be able to lower his price lower than his competitors could. And in some cases, he would team up, like Rockefeller did. What would be the euphemism later would be, or soon would be, a trust. Forming a trust is he would join and make price conspiracies with some of his big competitors, momentarily rally with them and say, hey, I tell you what, let's equally put our prices lower than the small guys can do. Because when you look at the budget of a small operation, you could only go so low on the price of each product before you go out of business. But when you're bigger, through economies of scale, you could pull a Walmart on someone and undersell them with your mass quantities. And that's exactly what he and the other big guys did. So they would undersell the small competitors and run them out of business. And then they would equally raise the price of their steel or steel products greatly once the little guys were run out of business. And they would do it together. So instead of going into a price war with each other in a laissez-faire capitalist way, because the writer of Capitalism, right, Adam Smith, said that would happen, that competitors would try to undersell one another, and it would ensure what was best for consumers. They would vie to have the best quality and have the lowest price they could get to beat out their competitors. But now the competitors are joining up and jointly putting their prices at an inflatedly high rate. So at any rate, you know, you see that other side to Carnegie as well, and to a manner by which things just didn't seem fair, right? And then with Gould, right? Jay Gould, the most infamous thing with him were the Erie Railroad Wars. If you look into that, he made a lot of dummy purchases under false names, so that he and a couple partners like Jim Fisk could buy a majority share out from under the nose of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And they could try to make a trunk line all throughout the East Coast, from virtually the Great Lakes to New York. So the trunk lines of like the Erie Railroad, the Central New York, and a couple other big ones, uniting them together under their sole leadership. And of course, so that they could put up high rates and have a monopoly, enjoy a monopoly on this trade in transportation and railroad transportation on the East Coast. He did some nefarious things when he worked for a tanner. He tried to corner the market on hides, on cattle hides, and lost his boss's business. His boss ended up committing suicide. So he did some nefarious things. He also would spread rumors on Wall Street, lies about the government being ready to buy a bunch of gold or sell its gold, and it would get people to buy into the gold. And then he would have a majority of it, and he would sell it once it inflated after everybody would buy into it. And so he would run these bull markets in a manipulative way, just through rumor. And so, yeah, Jay Gould became another villain to the public. Trachtenberg, that's the very last number. What he states, right, is that, okay, you're clearly going to see evidence of class conflict, of class consciousness between the workers and their employers or their bosses, etc., for sure. But he says to him, it was the system itself's fault, not the winners, right? So hate the system and not the system's winners, he states, right? And look into that section if you would, see how it ties into that thesis, the information utilized in it. All right. Let's see here. So you see some of the problems here. Per capita wealth climbed. Okay, so that's per person. So per capita income increased in some areas and some dates up to a third. Okay, so the standard of living rose during the Gilded Age. All right. But there was a depression, a big one in 1893. They had problems with overproduction. Prices would drop by a third. Bankruptcy, 6,000 businesses down in 1874 alone. So then they would lay off workers. They would cut their wages. They would increase their hours and decrease their pay, etc. Look at consolidation here. From 1897 to 1904, 1,800 companies merged into only 157. I can't remember what area of the economy that was in. So let's see here. The very extremes of effect lent to the machine an aura of supreme power, as if it were an autonomous force that held human society in its grip. So again, that's the Trachtenberg thesis. You need to know that for the test. But look at this disparity of wealth. According to Howard Zinn and Alan Brinkley, the top 1% of the population owned 88% of the nation's wealth and assets. In the 1890s, 10 million people lived below the poverty line. For many working class families, 2 incomes were required to support even a minimal standard of living, which was 600, and most people were only making between 400 and 500 a year, not even enough to subsist. Then the urban problems, we're going to wait until the progressive era, and even a little bit next week with Gilded Age Part 2 to address those. But like I said, trusts, price fixing, cooperation, vertical integration, when people were taking like Rockefeller over the entire process in their industry, and then horizontal integration, gobbling up all their competitors. It just didn't seem American. It didn't seem what Adam Smith stated would happen in a capitalist economy, as far as the invisible hand keeping things fair and equitable. All right. So monopolies, it just didn't seem fair. It didn't seem right. I'm going to go past this. We've already done this with the West. So there was a great railroad strike in 1877. There was a Homestead strike in 1892. There was a Pullman strike in 1894. You have the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, which took a middle ground in stating that workers need to buy into the wage system and just collectively bargain, right, as a union for better conditions, for fewer hours, safer conditions, better salaries, etc. And then you had people like the Molly Maguires, the Wobblies, or the Industrial Workers of the World, IW&W, that were more extreme, and in some cases wanted to do away with the capitalist system violently, and wanted like a Bolshevik-like revolution on behalf of the proletariat, the manual laborers of the industrial economy, against the powers that be, against their employers. So things really got polarized as far as class consciousness. When I ask you, right, Athena, Crystal, what are you? Just think about on your own what you thought. Was it your gender? Was it your ethnicity? Was it your religious affiliation? Your nationality? Well, you know, what was it? Class consciousness is when that's the first thing you think of, is I'm a factory worker. I'm an industrial laborer, right? That type of class consciousness. To Karl Marx and to the Marxist writings and with communism and the cousins to communism, like syndicalism, socialism, etc., is they imply that that is necessary for the revolution to happen, is for people to develop a sense of class consciousness. You see evidence of that. You even had a Secretary of the State in the 1890s have a quote whereby he was afraid of a class war happening in the United States. So look into the handout. Look at, I described a little bit of detail to the railroad strike and to the Pullman strike. All right. So take a look at that. But note also, right, is that on so many occasions, what the, yeah, see, I don't want to get into all of this. I have this in the handout. Let's see here. But look at like this right here. I wonder if I'm able to add to any of this. I'm not. Because this is the one that I have is on my thumb drive, and it has more than this on here, and you'll need to know it. And so I'll make sure the one that I have on my thumb drive is the one that I post. Okay. But note, right, the number that states that everything was leaning toward a plutocracy, a rule by the wealthy, that the federal government was extremely favorable to the rich, to the employers, to the industrial bosses. And look at that number and make sure that you're familiar with it, even if you don't choose it, okay? Because it will entail at least one question on the first test, all right? And I also will post for you the questions on test 1 that pertain to this topic, Gilded Age Part 1. But it definitely will entail a question on that section. And note how the writer tries to describe a federal government that was blatantly pro-rich. Look at protective tariffs, protective import tariffs that helped out the big industries against competitors by putting a tax on the competitors' products that came in and artificially forcing American consumers or buyers to purchase American-made, higher-priced products. All right, and look into the courts and how their euphemism was the right to contract on behalf of the employers to basically treat their workers as they please regarding their salaries and their hours, etc. And look at the unfavorable way that the strikes were dealt with by the federal government in sending in troops in the name of law and order and protecting the 14th Amendment property and Fifth Amendment property of corporations. But what about helping out the little guys? Look at the Interstate Commerce Act and the Sherman Antitrust Act, which were meant to help the little guys. But look how vaguely they were worded and how weakly they were enforced, as if the federal government's heart was never in it. Look at the Granger laws that took place in many states that tried to protect the small entrepreneurs, the small cash crop farmers, from the middlemen, from the railroads in particular. And look how the courts shut those Granger laws down in defense of the railroads. All right, so those are all examples used in that section that you could read. Be familiar with that for the test. Okay. So are there any questions? All right, thank you, Athena. And I tell you what I'm going to do is, especially just two of you being present today, I'm going to give you 10 points instead of just 5 this time. All right, Crystal, thank you. So I'm going to make a note for myself to give you 10 points rather than 5. You deserve it. You're very welcome. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, ladies, I'll go ahead and call it a day. Okay. But I'm happy to give you 10 points. You've earned it. Thank you so much for attending. And I hope this video helps. All right. So have a good day. Okay. Have a good week. And take care of yourselves. And give me messages anytime should you have any questions or concerns. All right. So have a good day. Okay.